The numbers were wrong. Not obviously wrong, subtly wrong. Out in the deep decimal places, the kind of error you only catch if you are checking everything. It was June of 1994, and the machine producing them was a brand new Pentium processor on the desk of Thomas Nicely, a mathematics professor at a small college in Lynchburg, Virginia, a man who was, as it happened, checking everything. He checked his code, he checked his mathematics, he ran the identical computation on an older machine, and the older machine disagreed with the new one. Suspect by suspect, only one remained. The flaw was in the chip itself. Deep inside the Pentium's floating point unit, in a lookup table used for division, 5 entries were simply missing. Machines all over the world were quietly getting certain divisions wrong, and nobody had noticed, because nobody else was looking this closely. By December, Intel was conducting the first full recall of a computer chip in history. On January 17, 1995, the company announced the cost. A pre-tax charge of $475 million. More than $1 billion in today's money, and all of it traceable to one man's calculation. And here's the part that deserves a slow look. That calculation had no application, no product behind it, no customer waiting, no practical use in any ordinary sense. He was adding up the reciprocals of twin primes, a sum with billions of terms and no payoff anyone could point to. The reason a serious mathematician gives months of machine time to a sum like that is the real story, and it is much bigger than a chip. It starts with counting. To see what he was chasing, start with the primes. A prime number is a whole number bigger than 1, that nothing divides except 1 in itself. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Look closely at that list, and something jumps out. Some primes arrive in pairs, exactly 2 apart, 3 and 5, 5 and 7, 11 and 13, 17 and 19, 29 and 31, 41 and 43. You can verify every one of those in your head right now. 5 is the only number that belongs to 2 different pairs. Keep going, and the pairs keep coming. 101 sits beside 103. These pairs are called twin primes, and the twin prime conjecture says the pairs never run out. However far you count, another pair of twins is always waiting somewhere ahead. Here's why that is not obvious. Primes thin out. As numbers grow, the average distance from one prime to the next grows without bound. So primes become rarer and lonelier the further you travel up the number line. Twins are primes packed as tightly together as 2 odd primes can possibly be. Rare things, side by side, forever. And yet they keep appearing. Below 1,000 there are 35 twin pairs. Below 1 million, more than 8,000. Below a billion computers have counted more than 800 trillion pairs of twins. The largest known pair, found in 2016, runs past 388,000 digits per prime, and the hunt is still live. A fresh pair, over 144,000 digits, long landed in January of 2026. The supply shows no sign of drying up. But no amount of counting can settle it, because the conjecture is a claim about infinity, and every computation ever run covers exactly none of infinity. Every pair found is consistent with the twins going on forever, and equally consistent with the twins stopping somewhere just past where we quit looking. So the question became whether the pairs ever run out, and it sits at the exact edge of what human mathematics can do. A child can ask it in one sentence. Nobody alive can answer it. That is the question Nicely was serving with his ruined computation, and it is the question this film is about. So is the man who finally moved it a calculus lecturer almost nobody in the field had heard of? The century of being stuck comes first. Folklore says the ancient Greeks posed the twin prime question. As far as any surviving document shows, they did not. Euclid proved, more than 2,000 years ago, that the primes themselves never run out, and that is the only statement about the infinitude of primes we actually have from him. The twin prime conjecture appears in print for the first time in 1849, when the French mathematician Alphonse de Polignac claimed something even bolder. He conjectured that every even number is the difference of 2 consecutive primes in infinitely many ways. Set that even number to 2, and you get the twin prime conjecture as the smallest, sharpest case of his claim. Nobody could prove the general version. Nobody could prove the special case either. Even the name arrived long after the question. The term twin primes was coined by Paul Steckel, writing in German, in 1916. The conjecture is 67 years older than its own name, and it would wait even longer for its first genuine theorem. That theorem came in 1919 from the Norwegian mathematician Viggo Brun, and it is famous partly for what it refuses to decide. Take every twin prime and add up their reciprocals. 1/3 plus 1/5, 1/5 plus 1/7, 1/11 plus 1/13, on and on forever. Euler had shown that the same sum taken over all primes grows past every bound, which is itself one way of proving there are infinitely many primes. Brun proved that over the twins the sum converges. It settles toward a single fixed value, now called Brun's constant, roughly 1.9. He got there by proving the twins thin out far faster than the primes themselves. And here is the trap. A convergent sum is perfectly compatible with finitely many twins, and perfectly compatible with infinitely many. Brun proved the twins are sparse. About whether they stop, his theorem says nothing at all. And that convergent sum is the computation from the opening of this film. Brun's constant is what Thomas Nicely was chasing, twin pair by twin pair out to 100 trillion, when the Pentium gave itself away. In 1923, Hardy and Littlewood raised the stakes. Instead of asking whether the twins continue, they predicted exactly how many there should be. Treat the primality of a number, and of the number 2 beyond it, as almost independent events. Correct for the precise ways they are not, using a universal constant of about 0.66. Out comes a formula, and that formula tracks the actual counts of twin primes with uncanny accuracy as far as anyone has ever counted, out past 10 million billion. But it is a prediction, not a proof, and no one has proved it since. The primes behave, in bulk, exactly as if the conjecture were true, and that is as far as it goes. So take stock of a century of work. A formula that predicts the twins almost perfectly. Trillions of confirmed pairs, a proof that they are sparse. And on the actual question, nothing. Worse than nothing. Nobody could prove that any finite gap between consecutive primes of any size keeps recurring forever. Not a gap of 2. Not a gap of a million. For all anyone could prove, the primes eventually spread so far apart that every distance you name is eventually exceeded permanently. That was the scoreline as the 20th century closed. In 2005, after a century and a half of standstill, the picture moved. Daniel Goldston, Janos Pintz, and Jem Yildirim, in a paper called Primes and Tuples, built a new sieve, a machine for combing the number line, and proved something genuinely new. Gaps between consecutive primes get arbitrarily small compared to the average gap. The average spacing between primes grows forever, and yet infinitely often, they showed, 2 primes land at a vanishing fraction of that spacing apart. It was the closest approach to bounded gaps in the history of the problem, and the field understood immediately that it was more than a result. It was an engine. Because their machinery works as a converter. Feed in knowledge about how evenly the primes distribute themselves among arithmetic progressions, a quantity measured by a number called the distribution level, and it outputs bounds on prime gaps. The conversion has a threshold at 1/2. Give it any level strictly beyond 1/2 by any margin at all, however microscopic, and it outputs a finite bound on gaps between primes, holding infinitely often. Under a strong classical conjecture from 1968 called Elliott-Halberstam, which pushes the level all the way up to 1, the engine already delivered gaps of at most 16. Everything was assembled, everything was waiting on a single ingredient. And the best proven distribution level, the Bombieri-Vinogradov theorem, sits at exactly 1/2. Not slightly above. Exactly at the threshold, an epsilon short. The cruelty of the situation was that everyone could see precisely which inch was missing. The field knew the name of the missing ingredient and could not produce it. The strongest analytic number theorists in the world, including the people who had built the engine, pushed on that threshold for 8 years, and it did not move. The consensus hardened that bounded gaps would come eventually. Perhaps in a generation, when some deep new idea arrived from somewhere. Daniel Goldston called it one of those problems you were not sure people would ever be able to solve. Nobody was looking at the University of New Hampshire. A lecturer there, in his late 50s, known to his calculus students as Tom, had picked this exact problem around 2009 and had been working on it in silence ever since. No announcements, no preprints, no conference talks, just a man the field had never heard of, alone with the barrier the field had given up trying to cross. The experts were waiting for a generation. They were about to get a single spring. Yitang Zhang was born in 1955 in China. At about 9 years old, he found a proof of the Pythagorean theorem on his own. Then the Cultural Revolution closed in, and his education simply stopped. He could not attend high school. For roughly a decade, he did farm and manual labor, and he read mathematics books alone, because there was nobody left to teach him. When university entrance exams resumed, he entered Peking University in 1978 at 23, in one of the first cohorts through the reopened doors, a degree in 1982, a master's in the mid-1980s, and then an invitation to America. He took his PhD at Purdue, recruited by the mathematician T.T. Mao, working on the Jacobian conjecture, a notoriously hard open problem in algebra. He finished in December 1991, and then his career failed to begin. What happened between Zhang and his advisor is disputed to this day, and the two accounts do not agree. Zhang has said his advisor did not write him letters of recommendation. Mo has said that Zhang never asked for any. The undisputed part is the outcome: a newly minted mathematics PhD with no letters and no job in mathematics. What followed were 7 years outside the profession entirely. A friend from his student days owned Subway restaurant franchises, and Zhang kept the books. In his own words, I was an assistant in his business for several years. Kentucky, mostly, with odd accounting work floating between Kentucky and Queens. His friend Jacob Chi recalls that at times Zhang lived in his car. 7 years. Most research careers do not survive one. In 1999, with help from old Peking University connections, the University of New Hampshire took him on as a lecturer. Not a professorship, a lecturer's post 8 years after the PhD, teaching calculus. His students called him Tom, and his sections filled up. And around 2009, he quietly chose his problem, the distribution threshold that had the whole field jammed. He described his working schedule later without any drama at all. 7 days a week, more than 10 hours a day, if you count the hours spent only thinking. 3 years passed that way. The final idea arrived on July 3, 2012, and not at a desk. Zhang was in Pueblo, Colorado, visiting his friend Jacob Chi, the music director of the local symphony. With half an hour to spare before leaving for Chi's concert, he stood in the backyard, hoping a deer might step out of the trees. The deer never came. The idea did. The way past one half, he saw, was not to beat the barrier everywhere, but to beat it for enough arithmetic progressions, the ones with smooth moduli, and that would be enough to run the engine and finish the proof. He wrote it up alone. On April 17, 2013, a paper called Bounded Gaps Between Primes arrived at the Annals of Mathematics, the most demanding journal in the field, from an author who had not published a paper since 2001. At the Annals, refereeing routinely takes years. This paper went to Henrik Evanets, among the greatest living analytic number theorists, who worked through it and found no error. His report called the main results of the first rank. Zhang gave his first public talk on it at Harvard on May 13th. On May 21st, the paper was accepted, 34 days from submission to acceptance, and what it proved deserves to be stated with precision. There are infinitely many pairs of consecutive primes that differ by less than 70 million. That is not the twin prime conjecture. It says that some gap below 70 million recurs forever, without naming which one. 70 million next to 2 sounds absurd, until you make the honest comparison. Before this paper, there was no bound at all. 70 million was not competing against 2, it was competing against infinity, and it was the first finite number ever written on that line. It came from a 58-year-old lecturer of whom Andrew Granville said that basically no one knew him, that the big experts had already tried to make this approach work, and that he had succeeded where all the experts had failed. Zhang's paper contains one sentence that reads, in hindsight, like an invitation. This result is not optimal, he wrote, and shrinking the bound is an open problem that will not be discussed in this paper. The internet accepted within days. About a week after the paper appeared, Mark Luco observed, in an offhand comment on the Math Overflow forum, that swapping out one crude estimate brought 70 million down to around 63 million. A week after that, Tim Trudgeon posted a short note, just under 60 million. Then on May 30th, Scott Morrison published a blog post with a computer-assisted improvement, and mathematicians piled into his comment thread. That comment thread was later converted, retroactively, into the first post of a project that did not officially exist yet. It became official on June 4, 2013, when Terence Tao posted the proposal for Polymath 8, a massively collaborative, open project with 2 declared aims. Understand Zhang's argument completely, then make the bound as small as possible. The work happened entirely in public, in blog comment threads running at roughly 50 comments a day at the peak, driven by perhaps a dozen or 2 genuinely active contributors, with many more following along. Morrison described the culture as an explicit license to be wrong in public. Wrong turns were not deleted. They stayed in the record, preserved, so nobody had to rediscover a dead end. Dow described the pace in a single line. At times, the bound was going down every 30 minutes. And the decisive inputs kept arriving from outside the core group, unsolicited. Janos Pintz, not an initial participant, posted a preprint optimizing Zhang's constants. Within about 2 days, the project had digested it, fixed its arithmetic errors, and dropped the bound to roughly 280,000. When a stubborn error term threatened to stall everything, Pintz supplied a sharper truncation. 4 researchers donated their simpler, stronger exponential sum estimates, then joined the project themselves. And Thomas Engelsma, an amateur who had spent a decade privately computing narrow prime patterns called admissible tuples, opened his database to the project, while Andrew Sutherland ran an automated public leaderboard where anyone could try to shave the current record. On July 27, 2013, the descent came to rest at 4,680. Zhang's paper had run 53 pages. The collaborative write-up ran 163. Then, with that write-up still in proofreading, the entire approach was overtaken. In late October 2013, James Maynard, a postdoctoral researcher in his mid-20s, announced in a talk that he could prove 700, using none of Zhang's new machinery at all. On November 19th, his preprint went public with the bound sharpened to 600. His method was a multi-dimensional refinement of the old Goldston-Pintz and Yildirim sieve, and it ran entirely on the classical 1/2 distribution level the field had held for decades. Terence Tao had found essentially the same method independently, at essentially the same time, and it delivered something Zhang's wrote never could. Bounded stretches of the number line containing not just 2 primes, but any number of primes you like, infinitely often. I launched a second project the same day the preprint appeared. Running Maynard's optimization machinery harder cut 600 to 300 fairly quickly. Then came the grind the participants themselves compared to Zeno's paradox. A key efficiency quantity had to cross the value 2, and it crawled. 1.845, 1.937, 1.951 never crossing, until an epsilon trick, enlarging the class of allowed functions at a controlled cost, carried it to 2.018. One shrinking number tells the whole story, the size of the prime pattern each method needed. Zhang needed 3.5 million candidate positions. The first project got that down to 632, Maynard 105. The final answer rests on just 50 positions, spanning 246. In April 2014, the project announced its final unconditional bound, 246, from 70 million to 246 in under a year. The sensation reached Zhang before the prizes did. He was surprised his paper was recognized within 3 weeks and watched himself appear in newspapers and magazines, from India to Europe to Brazil. His own verdict on fame was characteristically dry. "I am tired. I wish I could save my time and not spend too much of it being a star." The prizes came anyway: the Ostrowski Prize, the Cole Prize, the Schock Prize, a MacArthur Fellowship, and in January 2014, at last, a full professorship. The same year's Cole Prize also honored Goldston, Pintz, and Yildirim, the builders of the engine, on the same page as the man who completed it. And in 2022, James Maynard received the Fields Medal, with the small gaps work at the center of the citation. A problem once stuck at infinity had decorated everyone it touched. The final bound was set in April 2014, and here's the fact that frames everything since it has not moved. 246, unchanged through 12 years of attention, on one of the most watched numbers in mathematics. The polymath participants themselves predicted the freeze, writing that further gains from their approach would demand enormous amounts of computation for marginal returns. This is not neglect, and it is not a lull. It is a wall, and the wall has a shape worth understanding exactly. The full picture is a ladder, and it rewards precision. 246 is proved outright, with no assumptions at all. If a classical conjecture called Elliott-Halberstam is true, Maynard's method brings the bound down to 12. If a stronger, generalized form of Elliott-Halberstam is true, the collaborative machinery brings it to 6. Each rung is conditional on exactly the assumption named and nothing else, and none of those conjectures is proved. But notice what even the boldest assumption buys. 6 is not where the ladder pauses. 6 is where it ends. The reason has a name, the parity problem, and it goes back to Atlee-Selberg. Every result in this story runs on sieves, and sieves carry a blind spot that is provable, not conjectural. They cannot tell numbers with an odd number of prime factors apart from numbers with an even number of prime factors, and that blindness costs them exactly a factor of 2 at the finish line. Push sieve methods to their absolute theoretical limit and they hand you a pair of numbers, each of which is either a prime or a product of 2 primes, and no sieve can ever say which. Chen's theorem is the monument standing at that wall. There are infinitely many primes p, where p plus 2 is either prime or a product of 2 primes. As close to the twins as a sieve can come, and provably no closer. Be clear about what this means, because it is the most important honest sentence in this film. Getting from 246 to 2 is not a matter of more contributors, more computing, or more patience with the current method. 1 million people running the best sieve on Earth would stop at the same line, because the obstruction is a theorem about the method itself. Even granting the strongest plausible conjectures, the sieve road ends at 6. Reaching 2 requires an idea of a genuinely different kind, one that can tell a prime apart from a product of 2 primes, and that idea does not exist yet, anywhere. Zhang himself has not stopped. In 2022, he posted a preprint claiming major progress on a different legendary problem, the Landau-Siegel zeros. It stands claimed, unresolved, and not accepted, and he says an important paper on it is nearly complete. In 2025, he moved to Sunday Yat-sen University in China. Asked what he would pass on, he offered a single line: if you genuinely like something, do not give up on it easily. The sieve road ends at 6. Nobody knows where the next road starts, which means nobody knows who starts it. The last time this problem needed an idea from nowhere, it got one. Where such ideas come from is the question the rest of this film is about. Consider where the last great idea on this problem came from. Not from a famous chair at a famous department. From a calculus lecturer the field had, by its own account, never heard of. And consider how the descent from 70 million actually ran. A public, append-only record where wrong turns stayed visible instead of vanishing. An explicit license to be wrong in public. Verification that made progress objective, so that an offhand forum comment, a preprint from outside the project, an amateur's decade of private computation, each moved the number the moment it checked out. Perhaps a dozen or 2 active contributors. Most contributions incremental. Plenty simply wrong, and the bound fell 5 orders of magnitude in a year. That structure was not a lucky accident. It is a design, and it can be built deliberately. Givework runs it with agents in the loop. Open problems are decomposed into small attack tasks, exploration, lemma proving, computation, formalization, each with a budget and a machine-checkable definition of done. Every contribution is appended to a permanent log and folded into a compact state of the problem that the next agent reads before starting. A dead end is recorded and credited, so territory once ruled out stays ruled out instead of being rediscovered. And a task declares how much thinking it needs, not which model. So the same open questions are met by smarter agents every year without a word of them being rewritten. Nobody should promise you that 246 will fall this way. Zhang himself has warned that mathematical problems cannot be solved by solely increasing the number of researchers, and he is right. Polymath did not work because it was a crowd. It worked because it was a crowd with a shared, verified, permanent frontier, and that is the part that transfers. So the honest register is this: unlikely but possible, and the attempts compound. Every range checked stays checked. Every lemma proved stays proved. Every dead end stays marked, with its contributor's name on it, waiting for the agent that arrives next year knowing more. The twin prime conjecture has been chipped away at for 177 years, and its greatest single advance came from the one direction nobody was watching. This problem has never asked anyone for credentials. It asks whether the mathematics checks, and the lecturer nobody knew answered louder than the entire field. That standing is not reserved for anyone. It belongs to whoever shows up with an attempt that can be verified, and today, an attempt is something you can send. Point your agent at the unsolved. Help chip away at this conjecture. Get started now at givework.dev.